Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to Malt Muser Whiskey Reviews. I'm Eric. On the bar, we have a bourbon, E.H. Taylor Jr., single barrel, bottled in bond, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. We'll get into the Colonel's whiskey in a second with the nose, taste, finish review. I'll tell you a bit about the value, give you my final thoughts and the final score, and of course, leave you with the malt musing. But first, a bit about Colonel E.H. Taylor and his bourbon. So, Colonel E.H. Taylor bourbon comes out of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. That is because back in the late 1800s, the Colonel had started a distillery called OFC in Leestown, Kentucky, that was later purchased by George T. Stagg, so therefore became part of the Buffalo Trace range. He is the descendant of two American presidents and is really well known for his contributions to the innovation of making bourbon, including copper fermentation tanks, designing column stills, among a bunch of other things. He also was a really big fighter for higher standards in bourbon in the 1800s, culminating in 1871 with the passage of the Bottled in Bond Act, raising the standards for bourbon to ensure folks were getting a quality product back in those loose days of bourbon making. So he's got quite a storied history. As for his bourbon, it is bottled in bond. So 50% ABV. We know this doesn't have color added to it because it is a bourbon. As far as chill filtration, it doesn't say anything specific on this very decorative bottle, so we're not quite sure on that. It also does not carry an age statement. Some folks online say this is upwards of an 11-year-old bourbon, but we cannot be sure about that. It also comes in a tube, something you don't often see with bourbon. So you get a lot of different history and kind of notes about the bourbon itself on it. Pretty cool presentation. Here's what the bottle itself is looking like. Very tall, lean bottles, distinctive. Let's get some of this in the glass and see what's working on the inside. Right. Okay, so that is the color we're looking at. A nice copper, slight red hue to it. Looking good. The nose here, right away, a lot going on. I want to say apple cinnamon, leather, bit of spiciness. It is said that this is from Buffalo Trace's mash bill 1, which nobody knows the exact composition of that mash bill. There's definitely probably some rye in it, however, just based on the notes I'm getting here. Bit sharp. But all in all, just a nice, warming, spicy whiskey. Slight oakiness in the back, too. Good. Let's give it a taste. Cheers, y'all. Oily, sticky, medium body on the mouthfeel. It comes in sweet, with a bit of apple, then really heads into the spice notes. Clove, cinnamon, really, really big on this. There's a bit of a citrus thing going on too. I can't quite put my finger on it. Lingering in the background a little bit. Again, kind of just this drying, leathery tobacco as it goes into the finish. Just quite long. Honey, toffee, little bit of caramel, continues to dry, and then you're left with a nice kind of cooling mint, which I'm assuming is probably coming from that rye spice in this. I do think there's some rye in this for sure. Quite delicious. Let's put another, let's put a little bit of water on it first. We'll do about a teaspoon. Bring this down a notch and see what else happens. The sharpness on the nose goes away with the water. You're left with just a nice, warm baking spice, toffee, apple, full, just a really full nose. This whiskey's no slouch. The addition of water, that spice kicks back a bit. You are really get a lot, just full on heavy notes. Oak, dark chocolate, caramel. That apple is still working in there really, really nicely. As it goes into the finish, more caramel now, vanilla again, sweet, drying, spices there at the end. Almost maybe even a little bit of a mocha coffee note going on. Maybe toffee as well. I have to give this one more taste. Wow. Yeah, that leather note, leather and clove, still there with the water. This holds up nice. This is impressive stuff. Okay, so regarding a bottle of Colonel E.H. Taylor on the shelf, are you going to find it? Probably not. It is not an easy bourbon to get your hands on. I would almost venture to say it's close to an exclusive. I think they do a release or two, maybe a few more than two each year. It is usually heavily sought after. Most folks will get their hands on this in a secondary market situation. But the price, even on the shelf, if you're lucky, you're going to find this in that $70 to $80 range, which is about the lowest I've seen. When you go into secondary market or even some shops, you are looking in the over 100, 150. I've seen it over $200. The prices on this are just absolutely all across the board, and to be completely frank, way too high. So in terms of value, I would say, unless you get this at the MSRP price, the value on this one is kind of low. So final thoughts here on the E.H. Taylor single barrel. This is a really delicious bourbon, y'all. Their small batch, which is a little more accessible, comes at a bit lower price, I think is also really solid. But this single barrel is definitely a step up. E.H. Taylor itself, most of the range is going to be difficult to get your hands on. They do a lot of specialty releases under this label, all of which are going to be very, very expensive. But the single barrel itself, I think this is a well-rounded, really delicious whiskey. This really showcases what a solid bottled in bond 50% single barrel can do. Really, really quality stuff. But the price itself, because it's so sought after and so high in demand, I think in part because of just the bourbon craze and the label on this, it's going to cost you a lot. And I think there are some alternatives to get a good quality single barrel 50% ABV bourbon at much less price. Even with, I think of the Four Roses single barrel, which comes in with a little bit of rye spice as well. So there are alternatives out there to this one. But if this is something you just got to have, you're not going to be disappointed. My final score on the E.H. Taylor single barrel is going to be a 3.75 out of 5, which means I do recommend you try this and get yourself a bottle if you find it at a good price. Okay, y'all. There is my review of Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr.'s single barrel bottled in bond bourbon. Hit subscribe if you've yet to. I put out reviews every Friday, so you won't miss a thing if you are subscribed. And with that, I will send you over to your malt musing. I'm going to sip the rest of this bourbon, and I'll catch you next Friday. Cheers, y'all.